How's everybody feeling? Yeah. Can I see your show of hands, 1 to 5? How hopeful are you for the decarbonization? 5. I see 5. Oh, okay. I see a 4. I see a couple of 4s. How about our online crowd? I think we have about 135 viewers. Hello, everyone. How many responses did we get there on a scale of 1 to 5? Or do we have quiet viewers? We have shy viewers. You're not even here, present. Okay. I like to start again this panel by repeating what was said by Christy Fiander of the Yakama Nation, which I think is really important when she acknowledges that every year the Yakama Nation honors our relationship with the earth. And we must really always keep that present. The film talked about relationships with the earth, with younger generations, with trees, with carbon and concrete. So it's about relationships. And the women of carbon, as we heard today, can help boost the energy levels to take action. The reality is that we need each other. So to make a quick intro again of our panelists here from closest to me, starting with Susan Jones, founder of Atelier Jones, located in Seattle. She's featured in the film highlighting the Heartwood mass timber workforce housing and her firm's mass timber Sierra houses built after the fires in Greenville, California. Next to her is Jennifer Holmgren, CEO of Lancetec. Lancetec's carbon recycling technology, like retrofitting a brewery onto an emission source, like a steel mill or a landfill site. Wow. Just wow. And next to her is Michaela Harms, Vice President of Sterling Structural. Michaela has co-written and managed nearly $4 million in USDA grant-funded research focused on mass timber. Go, Michaela. Thank you for that. And we have Lindsay Landau-Fasulis, Director of Sustainability at Turner Construction. She works with Turner's local sustainability teams to implement low to no carbon construction practices across the company. This is global. And their goal is to create the first fossil fuel-free construction site. So that is truly, truly exciting. So I'd like to kick off my first question. We'll start with Susan, because you're closest to me. So as a leader in your industry, how do you ensure your vision for sustainability that is embraced by stakeholders?
So I knew this question was coming, and I thought I might answer it a slightly different way, so I hope it's okay.
Of course.
First of all, I don't think we have a lot of time to convince a lot of people, and you either kind of get it or you don't. And so part of me is finding the right partners. You mentioned reaching out and collaborating, finding the right collaborators who really get it, who don't need the convincing. They just need the tools that I, particularly my firm, Atelier Jones, can offer. And that makes a lot of difference. And so we don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people of the less risk or the less cost or the institutional partners that really just try to want to get the job done for their stakeholders. We just find the people who really get this and know this and want to move forward now, because we don't have a lot of time. And so I think that's where we're, as a smallish architectural firm, able to be nimble, able to be very creative in who we choose and who chooses us as our partners. And it's from the Department of Defense to a nonprofit, Sierra Institute for the Community and Environment that you saw there, who was the client for those Greenville houses and the Roundhouse that's going to be in the Venice Biennale next week. It's an extraordinary opportunity to create a community that comes together around a shared vision. And the mass timber community in particular has been an amazingly supportive, women-driven, in so many cases, not all cases, but in many, many cases, community. And I'm incredibly blessed after 40 years in this architectural profession as a leader to have had so many valuable partnerships, collaborations that have pushed me and led me forward and filled in the gaps of my knowledge. And I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Thank you.
Good, your question. Alicia.
Yes, yes, thank you. And I'll go to Lindsay next for this one. How do you ensure your vision for sustainability is embraced by stakeholders?
To me, it's a lot about talking to the people that you're working with, talking with the people that are building the buildings, that have designed the buildings, and finding what is interesting and exciting to them. One of our biggest supporters of we're electrifying our fleet, he doesn't really care, but he really likes engines. And so he got to nerd out about engines. And we're electrifying our fleet based off of a lot of the research that he did. And so it's finding those partnerships even outside of our groups that I think is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. We were talking beforehand, and that's really like, I guess, the secret sauce, right? Is what is that person passionate about, and how they create impact with that passion. So I've definitely had those experiences. Well, why don't we go with Michaela? How would you answer this question?
Definitely building off of you have to really speak to the person in their language, and whether that's excitement about engines or just understanding that sustainability comes in so many forms. It's not just environmental sustainability, it's the sustainability of our supply chains, it's the sustainability of creating jobs regionally. And so maybe the conversation for that specific client is, I want to truly and deeply support domestic manufacturing. And that is a really strong message for certain stakeholders. Sometimes the message is your construction can go faster, and that's just good enough. But as long as the bottom line of it is really built in that sustainability piece, you can really drive people. I think the other thing for me personally is, I'm in the forest products industry, and you can deeply, deeply connect people to forests. You can really speak to their soul by putting them back into a forest. And so when you make that connection of your love, biophilia, the love of life, that is inherent in all human beings. And to speak to that, and then to tell them that's accessible to you, and now you can support a domestic wood products industry, bringing jobs to woodland communities, bringing jobs for domestic manufacturing, and an absolutely gorgeous building. Now you have an entire story, and people really feel a sense of place with story and connection. So that's what we try to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. There was a lot of moments in the movie that struck me, and just adding to what you're saying is the T3 building and being of mass timber, and they mentioned that people just touch the walls, the material, because it's comforting, right? I don't find myself often touching drywall or anything like that, right? So that is, it has another added, benefit. I'm going to go to Jennifer. And Jennifer, we heard a lot about energy democracy and climate justice. And then one of the things that really struck me was the question, or statement rather, that there has been a price for progress, right? The Industrial Revolution ignited these incredible advancements, but it has also disrupted our carbon cycle at a really, really fast pace. How can our audience present today and virtually, how can we take action on that? And I'd love to hear you talk further on, climate justice.
Thank you. if you look at some of these climate disasters, it's clear that the poorest among us are the ones that don't quite make it through. And the first time that you start to think about that, the first time it really struck me was when Katrina hit New Orleans. And 10 years later, less than 50% of the single mothers had been able to return. So people that live on the edge, they don't ever get what they had back, right? They lose everything. And so you realize when you see all of these things that there is just no way back out of the things that we're doing, right? We're irreversibly changing people's lives. So to me, I look at the world actually through a justice lens, to be honest. And I actually believe that if we all looked at the world with a little more empathy and cared a little bit more about justice, we wouldn't be having these debates about climate change. The only reason we're having them is because we're trying to figure out whether we can make an extra dollar here or there, rather than worry about the koala bear that just burned his paws in the forest fire. And that's not thinking about people. So my view of the world is very simple. Empathy is the only way we're going to get out of this problem. And we're all doing technology, and I'm doing technology, but that isn't what's going to solve this. It's how we view the world and how we view ourselves in this world. What can each of you do? I just told you. Think about the world just a little bit differently. And if I were to put myself in my business shoe and not in my personal sense shoe, you know, when we talk about what we do, we talk about creating a carbon smart world, carbon smart consumers. And the reason I say that is because what I want all of you to do is to ask yourself, where is the carbon in my product coming from? Whenever you go buy something, whenever you think about buying something, where is your carbon coming from? Ask yourself that question. And I'll just give you an example of this. So most people think about fossil carbon as impacting power, right? Our power comes from coal and natural gas and now renewables. Our fuels come from natural gas or petroleum. What people don't think about is that everything you wear, everywhere you go, is probably made from a fossil carbon. So 30% of the barrel of petroleum goes into making the stuff you buy. And I'll give you this example. This is a hat that is made by On. They have a whole Clean Cloud collection. And the Clean Cloud collection, the polyester, came from a gas that was going to be pollution at a steel mill in China, okay? So we take a steel mill gas and prevent it from going into the atmosphere, becoming CO2 and particulate emissions, and instead we capture it, we turn it into ethanol, and our supply chain partners turn it into polyester that ends up in a hat. So that's why I'm saying, ask yourself, where is the carbon in what you buy coming from? Is it fresh fossil carbon? Is it recycled carbon? Is it biological carbon? That's what I want, is a future where people ask themselves that question.
Yep.
Questions you ask. The questions you're asking, Jennifer, are really, really essential to our role as architects. And I know there's a lot of architects here at the Chicago Architectural Center and listening online likely. We have, as a profession, have been asking ourselves, where do our materials come from? And it's another way of asking at a deeper level, because we didn't even know our materials were the problem with carbon, really, as a whole, until we asked, where is the carbon coming from? And then we had to ask deeper, what happens to the carbon as we're using them, and how long does it last in a building? And so we're surrounded in this beautiful city of Chicago in this beautiful building, steel and concrete, tremendous carbon emitting materials as they're made without the innovations that we're hearing about in the beautiful film here today. And we're surrounded by looking at different alternatives to those materials and asking and pressing our industry partners and our scientists to do better for us. And also, in our case, looking at lower carbon materials in general to the tune of, say, 20, 30, 40% lower than, concrete or steel. And then those buildings, those materials that sequester that carbon, and then those buildings that then can help regenerate our forests. And that huge circle of this circular economy, this huge circle of how the materials that I supply and the Michaela's company builds, and you all build with, make a lower carbon impact, but they also regenerate our forests and they also help lower our carbon footprint as a building industry as a whole. And that's not an easy thing to understand. It took our firm over a decade to even get the scraps of it, and then to collaborate with so many partners to help really substantiate that, because I'm not a life cycle scientist, I'm not a carbon scientist, I'm not a forester, I'm an architect. And to ask those questions. And Jennifer, I really appreciate you just pushing us from your perspective as a brilliant scientist to really understand and help us find those answers, because we need all hands on deck.
Yes, thank you for that. And yes, Michaela.
I would just love, my favorite thing is ask the questions of your supply chain, and especially with architects, because I think that there's the first question of which material can we talk about that has a lower carbon base. And it's going to be many materials. There's no one material. And that's why I love the example of the hat, because it's every single material, all your clothing, everything you need to think about where it's coming from. And then once you get there, especially as architects, challenge yourself more. You know, we always talk about this, think globally, act locally. Architects have so much power. So the largest mass timber manufacturer in the entire world is located just south of Chicago. Woo! And so come visit. And any manufacturer in your region, go visit and learn about that supply chain and learn about how it supports wood. And then learn what your specifications do to the decisions that people make on those materials. So you could specify Doug fir, which would come from the Pacific Northwest. Not a super regional wood, but amazing for that region. You could specify SPF. Now it's coming from Canada. Amazing region, but you're not supporting this region. This region, you can get spruce pine fir south and support and keep the sawmills open in your local economy. The sawmills across the United States are closing down because they're not being utilized. We're so excited about mass timber, but we're buying it from Europe and we're supporting their forests. We really need to think as architects and engineers and designers, how can I ask the next question that supports my local economies, creates regenerative jobs, and a really big love for the material that we engage with every day, and supporting these woodland communities, but also from the concrete perspective and also from the steel perspective. So it's the first layer of questions that many architects started asking, 30 years ago, but we're at a very new layer of questions that brings in a strong social justice equity as well. And it's really important to take yourselves further than that first question, because you really need to support the teams around you and engage very deeply with your supply chains.
Yeah, and Lindsay, I'd like for you to also contribute to this, and if you could touch upon the economic investment and how it goes into, climate justice as well. Yeah.
I do not feel qualified to answer that. So I'm going to answer the question I want to answer.
That's okay. We want to hear. We want to hear your answer.
No, I think the construction industry is really starting to understand the need of the supply chain and understanding where our materials are coming from, both from a carbon perspective, but also from that social equity and human rights. We have had a couple projects that have tried to trace the wood back to the forest and can't. So we don't know where it came from. Even if it's FSC, we can't do it. Where's the steel coming from? And now you start getting into things like batteries. because we want more batteries so that we're using less diesel. And there's huge issues with where those metals are coming from. And so really just starting to kind of scratch that surface and say, how far back are we responsible for? Is it 1 layer? Is it 2? Is it 4? How far back can we go? So that's supply chain.
Yes, thank you for that. Let me see, on to our next question. There's so many questions. Okay, so the movie is called Women of Carbon, right? Badass Women of Carbon. I'm going to insert that into the title. And Jennifer, you at one point in the movie, you were reflecting on how you're very happy to not have listened to those people who told you not to do it, no, you're not going to make it as a scientist, or you will not succeed. I'm in the raise of hands. How many of us have heard that? Can you elaborate on that and where you were then and where you are now?
Gave you these questions. No. I think my father would argue that I'm more stubborn than anybody he ever met, except him, of course. He didn't know that. But, I think it's never been a vision of where I wanted to be. It was a vision of where I was at that moment in time and what I wanted to create, right? And it's funny, I laugh because the movie is Carbon, and I actually think of myself as a woman of steel, because, not because of the way you're thinking about it, but because I like to put steel in the ground. I like to build refineries. I like to build big things that do things that are different than the way things were done before. And so that's actually my moment, and it doesn't really matter what anybody says in terms of whether I should do something or not, because my entire motivation is find new ways of doing something, find a different way, create progress. That's how I think.
Yeah, and the way I can rephrase that question is, obviously we're very happy that you did not listen to those naysayers, and I guess quite simply, what would you advise a young woman in this industry? What advice would you give her?
Yeah, I mean, to advise, I guess the most important thing is to have a passion for something, right? At the end of the day, you can only do what your heart wants you to do. It's that simple, whether it's get a degree that somebody told you you couldn't get, or go to another country where people told you not to go. But I think the biggest way to make it through, in my mind, is just do what the penguins in Madagascar always did. Smile and wave. You don't have to fight every battle. If somebody tells you you can't be a chemical engineer, that's nice, okay, let's move on. That is not the fight you want to pick. What is the point of that fight? There are other fights that are more important. And so my biggest advice is figure out what you want to argue about and just let your work speak for itself and keep moving.
So true, Jennifer. It's just really true, powerful words, and probably reflect everybody's experience on this stage and in this room. I think your words, I think one of the questions later is what were the most powerful words, and I kept thinking when I answered that question to myself were yours about how females are outliers and they have therefore a different perspective. And I think you framed it in terms of freedom, and perhaps the freedom of the expectations that men of our generation at least felt they had, which I think hopefully is less now. But I think I took that question in a different way, and that because feeling outside many of these mainstream dialogues that were happening in conference rooms, at conference tables, at lunchrooms, walking down the street together, Often I wasn't in those conversations, and then we would get back in a room and something will have kind of already been decided. But as a female, you're often looking outside in, and you don't really, why are these people making this decision? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it builds into your brain all the time that you're always like, huh? And I think that level of having to become comfortable with being that outsider, that outlier as you call them, it helps you think about problems that we all face in very different ways, whether it's the thing that what you were having for lunch today or whether it's how to change the world. And I think after 10, 20 years, there's an ability to think powerfully, regeneratively, about how our profession, as architects, speaking for my profession now, how we need to adapt to the current challenges in front of us, to the current ways that society is asking for change and asking for expertise and leadership and vision about what architecture should become and how we move things forward in a different way. And that is not hard won. That is a knowledge that's been honed over, in my case, decades.
Of course.
The one comment that I always get nervous about is when I hear people say that you have more empathy because you're a woman, or you think in a certain way because you're a woman. The fact is, I'm not a mother, but we raise boys not to cry. We raise boys not to feel. And then we say, well, great, you women, you have more empathy. And, I guess all I'm saying is, if we're going to solve some of these problems, we need to let the boys into the room too, because the boys also have feelings. They just have never been allowed to talk about their feelings. And maybe that's changing, but I just want us to always remember that men have such a big role in this. We just need to let them in the door and talk about this differently.
Empathy, like you said before.
Lindsay, I think you want to answer this question.
Well, I had I think an add-on before we got into the empathy part, so this isn't about empathy. No, you're good. I found and still find that one of the biggest challenges is inertia. That this is the way we've always done it. This is how I'm too busy, I can't think about something new. And so every time I would approach with a different thought or a what about this, or I think this is important, and it challenged that inertia, it was always a no. And then the second time it was like, we'll talk about it. And then the more I talked about it, the more it kind of seeped its way in, right? And so don't take no to be just hard and fast. No is just a not yet. We're running out of yet. We're running out of that time to wait. But that inertia is very difficult to overcome. People are very comfortable with the way they have always done things, and challenging that. Sometimes it feels very personal, like you're challenging how they are or who they are because of the way they're building.
Yeah, I thought that question was really important, or that statement that you made, because I connected with that. And that's why, I started my own firm because I heard a lot of no's, and I started a national nonprofit because of the no's really pushed me into the direction that I was discouraged to walk into. I am the mom of tweens, and I call them my case studies because they're a boy and a girl, and it is fascinating. And I agree with what Jennifer was saying, is that we have to, raise our boys to support our girls in the world. I would like to take some questions from the audience. Does anybody have questions? Right over here. We have a microphone coming right to you.
Thanks. Obviously, it seems that this film was shot before the situation the political situation where we find ourselves now. How has the opting out of the climate accord and the rollback of the Inflation Reduction Act, I believe it's been rolled back, how has that affected your day-to-day operations, but then also your long-term plans?
Who is this for? Is this for me?
I'll start. And that's a tough one. I have the benefit of working with a lot of really awesome clients who are still moving forward with their climate goals and are requiring me to participate, and they're requiring my company to participate. And so that has been a fortunate occurrence for me myself. I also choose to focus on what I can do. It's really easy to get overwhelmed and consumed and negative, and just so swept up in the whatever you feel. But I can choose to use my role, I can choose to use my community to continue the work that we are doing, and to continue talking about it, to continue piloting low emission equipment and low carbon concrete, regardless.
I mean, honestly, I feel energized. I feel in some ways even more optimistic because of the power of our thin blue line. Yes, I live on the West Coast, but the power of the 3 states that I belong as a region to. I think cities like Chicago, New York City are going to be more important powers of centers of power, because you do have the ability to make decisions regionally that impact a great number of people. And despite some of the setbacks that we've obviously all felt and feel challenged by and feel discouraged by, I think there's even a greater role for cities and states and communities that believe in these values to move forward. And I've found that there are distinct ways of action that happen regardless, and in some cases in spite thereof. I haven't luckily been, we have been actually directly affected by some of the decisions, but in some ways other doors have opened because of that. And I just don't see it being a black and white issue necessarily, and that's not a political statement, it's just the reality of what we've faced. In some ways, I lost my point of thought. There have been opportunities that have presented themselves. I think, I know what it was. The macroeconomic of the higher interest rate has really hit the building industry hard. And I think that probably, more than anything, has had an impact on our ability to get impactful prototypes built again and again and again in the last 3 or 4 years, even prior to the prior election.
I may just add, so I had worked a lot in my career in public-private partnerships for research and through multiple administrations. And thank you. I love just starting with stay optimistic, because I can tell you on that side, we don't change the work, we change the wording. We just say,
Yes.
No, I'm telling everybody, are you kidding me? We don't change the wording. We just, instead the grant says, support domestic supply chains and build rural economic incentive, but it's the same exact thing.
More efficient.
Yeah, it's more efficient. It's the same exact thing. Carbon and sustainability and like this connection to the material is the exact same thing, and the research is exactly the same. So please have some confidence in the amazing civil servants that are out there and the drive that they have to keep their work going, because they're used to changing administrations. And I apologize for going back, but I want to say one thing about speaking to young women. So I am from engineering, construction, and manufacturing. It is a very male-dominated world. And I always like to remind people, and it's in line with this question, so thank you for this, don't get stuck in thinking the grass is greener. And a big reason I say that is I went to school in Finland, and everybody looks at Finland as the most progressive place on earth, and it is wonderful. It's absolutely a wonderful country. I was the only woman in my program in Finland. And so it's important to remember that this is a global consideration, it's a global situation, and it's really important when I talk to young women. I'm very outgoing and I'm very stubborn and I am willing to just kind of yell a lot. I actually got that from my mother, so I appreciate her for that. But what I really had to learn was, one, find excellent mentors and weasel your way in. I mean, just go at it. No matter how shy you are, try to get in there. I loved watching this film because there are amazing people in this film. Will Schruber, Kate Simonin. I was the kid, seriously, who would just run up to them at conferences and say, talk to me about everything, show me everything. But they got me here. It's those mentorships and creating those connections and real human empathy connections where you can become friends, you can become passionate together. And then work on your confidence through vulnerability and curiosity. Confidence isn't arrogance. Confidence isn't lying. Confidence isn't putting on a front. Confidence is asking questions. Confidence is going to the person who can help you get there, and you can really be curious. So I just really like to instill that in young women because it is scary, and I was in so many rooms where I just wanted to cry. And I was so, oh my goodness, you know, in plywood mills in the South, auditing, like little tiny lady, getting called little lady, you know, and it's just, and I learned to stand up and be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable. And I want you to know that I'm uncomfortable, but I'm still here and I will still be here. And so I hope you girls and women and everybody out there can work on embracing that, because confidence is really hard. And I'm a loudmouth, so I can say that.
I'm glad you came back to that question. You know, thank you. And I mean, that vulnerability takes a lot of courage. And that's where I think our strength as women really shines, you know, to be vulnerable. Jennifer, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to go back and address your question. So no, we can all keep going back. Look, I agree with everything that's been said, right? We keep marching on. We keep saying that, you know, we pitch the story as energy independence, energy security. We can say whatever we want to ourselves, but the fact is that we are working in mandated markets versus voluntary markets, right? The voluntary markets keep going. The guy who made the On hat will probably still make an On hat. But I'm asking people to build $150 million refineries that take waste steel mill emissions and make ethanol that I can use to make other products, that I can make sustainable aviation fuel, without a mandate that incentivizes people to buy aviation fuel that's 5 times more expensive. It isn't going to happen. Let's be realistic. It's just not going to happen. It will happen with the few voluntary folks. But the mandated markets stall and slow down. And I think we have to be realistic and understand that it is important who is in office, how they feel about what's going on. These things actually matter. And so the only thing I can tell you is lack of decisions of something that takes 3 to 4 years to build really slow down progress. The only way to get down a cost curve is to build, build, build. And you can't build if there's no reason to build. So you got to get out there and vote. That's the only thing I can tell you. Who is in office matters. What people are saying at every level, from your town to your state to the federal government, these things matter. They really, really matter to make progress.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, the optimism is real here. And I mean, I just see it as another pandemic. We got through 2020, and we're going to get through this one. I'd like to take another question, maybe from our online viewers. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Let's see. The first question that you asked the audience here about ranking their feelings, I just wanted to report that we had a lot of answers to that, a lot of 5s and 4s, and somebody said negative infinity. And then we had a comment from Susan related to women in architecture. She said that there was something fresh and invigorating just hearing women talk about concrete and wood and steel. I realized my own biases towards masculine masculinizing these materials. The feminine voice is so powerful here in all her facets. I wanted to pass that along.
It's totally okay to geek out about construction materials.
Amazing.
Totally okay.
And,
that was-
and I'm a little biased in engines. I actually also really love engines and tractors, so you can geek out about all of it.
It's really it's a great comment, and I also just want to focus on the journey that it takes to bring these materials to scale, to make an impact. I mean, we're with mass timber, we're kind of like, I don't know, maybe 1910, maybe 1895. Imagine when reinforced concrete got introduced. It was introduced in like 1850. And then by the time, real building started happening, it was like 1900 and 1910. And then we're trying to figure out all those things that Lindsay mentioned, like, well, you do it this way. When you build a concrete building, it's 32 feet on center, 18-inch columns, and you go 12 and a half feet high, maybe 15 feet high, and that's how you do it. Lay it out. Do it. It's form follows parking. Those are the things that we learn, and that's just, that's how you do it. That's okay. I spent 10 years in that environment.
So I have been
Change that.
given the cue.
It's been a really key thing. So
See, I know this is just episode 1. But I do want to take one more question from the young lady over here, our last question. You raised your hand? Yes.
Thank you. You touched on this earlier, but I really wanted to hear.
Can you
from
please hold the microphone closer?
Yeah, sorry. You touched on this earlier, but I really wanted to open the floor to all of you guys and ask, when you face that resistance, especially as a woman in your professions, how do you push back against that, and how do you make your voice heard?
I don't know. I think I just kept talking. I really did. Like, and it's easy to take it personally. As I mentioned, other people take it personally when you challenge them. But I just kept talking and saying, I think this works. Or I just went and did it. I have a sign on my wall that says, create the things you wish existed. And so I just went and did it. And I don't know.
Just do it. Thank you. Michaela?
My boss is in the room, and I'm like so curious what his answer is, which would be really fun for me. No, I don't take no very well, but the one thing my parents were exceptional at teaching me was, I don't understand what you're saying, Michaela, like what is going on there, but if you can do it, by all means, go ahead. And so they gave me that permission. And I really, really respect my parents for that, being like, we have no idea why you're traveling all over the world to build weird Adobe buildings, but if you can financially figure that out for yourself, go ahead. So I think that's what I've taken into business is, when you have this wild idea, I mean, I'll use Sterling as an example. When I first met the Sterling team, they told me, oh, we're the biggest manufacturer in the world of CLT and we're in Chicago. And I was like, no, you're not. I don't know who you are, But that's because they were working in a different market. They were working in industrial markets, which is another amazing use for the material and still has an incredible carbon story. And then when I went and visited, like I said, go visit. When I went and visited, I was blown away. I was just absolutely blown away. So my curiosity got me there, right? And then I did sit down at lunch with another gentleman in the room, and I said, you guys got to get into mass timber. The margins are awesome, and you're really, really doing cool stuff. And they were kind of like, we don't know about that market yet. It seems a little like a fad. But then we moved forward, and I stayed in touch, and I worked on factory production control for industrial matting and worked through all of these things and came prepared. I'd make the presentation, I'd make the pitch, I'd put it all together, and I'd work with them and ask them questions and be curious and learn. And, we moved forward and we launched a whole new division of our business that way. So I did kind of get told no, like, we don't know about that market. And I said, I'm gonna look into that market. I even opened up my own consulting business to do it. And so I would just say, be curious, get really, really good at presentations, keep talking. Like, it's true, it's very true. And I do love that women are expected and learn great communication, because sometimes we're very misunderstood. And so by really building into those types of skills and being very clear and understanding the need and being very empathetic, you can get there.
I'll couple of things. So first of all, by now you've figured out that I am a speak softly and carry a big stick person. And I am a massive introvert. Okay, so I've gotten to where I've gotten while being a massive introvert, okay? And so the way I approach the world, and I think it's very different for somebody who's an extrovert or somebody who's an introvert. I told you, you don't have to fight every single battle. You have to fight the ones that you need to fight at that moment in time and win the other ones in the back. You learn to create coalitions when you want to do something that's really disruptive, something that really changes everything. What you do is you bring a group of people to the party, okay? So you learn who are the key stakeholders that you have to convince. You go convince them, and then you're not the only one in the room that is speaking up for something. And that is super, super important. And that's the only way to win, because depending upon where you are at that moment in time, so I'm almost 65 years old, okay? So at this point in my industry, people know who I am. I don't have to fight anything, okay? I just have to speak generally. But when I was 30, it was completely different. And so at a different point in your life, you have to push your ideas in different ways. And when you're young, and like I said, when I was young, I was the only woman ever in a room, and you just need to learn how to speak and how to get other people to also speak with you. One of my girlfriends and I, who are of the same age, we used to say that we were invisible, that the women in that room were invisible. Always. Nobody paid attention to anything you said. And that's okay. You learn to persuade people in different ways. And so figure out your room, read your room, figure out who you're with, and then figure out how you win that battle on that day. It's not always the same way.
From another introvert, even though I maybe present as a functional extrovert, I'm not. And really critical to being in that room at as a 30-year-old is not to actually, as an architect, there's so much to learn. So sometimes maybe our industries are different, but you can't really bring people along because you don't actually know what you're doing. And that's not you, that's me, that's every 30-year-old architect. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And I was one of those. So my experience was putting aside my ego, which was massive, and pushing it down, and you doing what I actually do best naturally, which is listen. Listening and learning, and then looking around, reading that room, and finding your advocates, finding your allies, finding your mentors, and bonding with them, and getting their confidence, getting your confidence with them, practicing your voice with them, building that level of confidence in the beginning, and the next step, and the next step. And then 10 years later, maybe in some cases 15 years later, there's a point where you can either begin to bring people along with you and they go with you, or maybe in some cases it doesn't quite work out that way. And if you're in environments that aren't supportive of you, when you've done the hard work of figuring out how to do this big bad profession in front of us as an architect, then find another environment, whether that's creating your own or going and joining and finding allies elsewhere. You'll find them. But there's a lot of learning to do, and that takes a lot of patience, and you'll get there.
I'm so sorry, I have to add one thing that's so important, and I know you do too. But Anna, actually, when you started this by saying, when you feel overwhelmed, take a breath, don't burn yourself out, and please take care of yourself. It's very, very hard when you're in those rooms and it's so and you want to cry. Don't always push through it. That if you push yourself too far, you're not going to bring your best self to do this work. So please, 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 every single person, all people, not just women, don't forget to take care of yourself. Really important.
Jennifer?
I'm going to do the opposite for a second, because maybe because I'm so old, I can't remember what it was really like to be when I was 20 years old. So for all of the older people in the room, I do have one request. Whether, despite everything I said earlier, generally, the women that work for you will not step forward. The men always step forward because they have been raised or have a very different level of confidence. Men tend to feel, I'm sorry to generalize, that they can do anything. And women tend to think that they're just not good enough to do anything. So the only request I have is for all of you who are leaders, pay attention to the people in the room. Don't let that self-selection process prevent you from having women step forward and grow. And that's something you have to really do and guard. And I can tell you that 50% of my leadership team, and I have engineers and scientists, 50% of the people in the science lab, they're women, okay? And they're women because we can select during the interviews by paying attention not to what people say or what they're trying to say, but what they have done and how they speak about their work. You have to interview people differently. You have to ask different questions because men and women are different. So if you don't want to just select men for every role in science and engineering and in leadership, you need to, as a leader, ask different questions. So that's actually the opposite advice, not for the growing ups, but the ones who are sitting in the big chair. The big chair has a responsibility to create a different way of people showing up.
Thank you for that. We all need each other. And my last little nugget to that is know your value. You bring value to every space. So I'd like to wrap this up. This was excellent. I could talk, several hours to all of you women. And let's take action. Let's think about how we're going to take action. Thank you, everyone.